Hello, this is Len Suzio with Geodata Vision. For 26 years, I've been advising hundreds of banks all around the country regarding their CRA responsibilities. Today, I'm going to speak to you about the biggest, most important decision you will ever make regarding CRA. The biggest CRA decision for any bank is how it defines its assessment area. But in my 26 years of advising hundreds of banks, I'm surprised how little attention is paid to this very important detail. There's an old saying, the devil is in the details. And this applies in spades to the assessment area delineation for CRA purposes. As I will explain and show you in this brief presentation, how you define your assessment area affects everything, your performance and the performance expectations applied by examiners as they develop your CRA performance evaluation. Do you want fair performance standards? Well, every banker wants fair performance standards. But who determines CRA performance standards? The answer will shock most bankers. You determine your CRA performance standards. You heard me right. The examiners don't determine your performance expectations. You do. How? By how you delineate your assessment area. When you describe your assessment area, you tell examiners what your market is, and your market profile drives everything in CRA. The market demographics, the competitive structure of the market, and the mortgage and small business loan markets are all used by examiners to establish performance contexts and derive performance standards. Vince Lombardi once said, winning isn't everything, it's the only thing. Well, there's no set of absolute performance standards in CRA. The lending tests are essentially the same for ISBs and large banks, but the standards applied to those tests are unique because they are determined based on performance context. So CRA becomes totally based on how you delineate your assessment area because that's what drives performance context. For example, Lending Test 3 measures your penetration rate lending in the assessment area LMI tracks. A 15% penetration rate may be very strong performance in one assessment area, but very weak performance in another. The next slide explains the relationship between tests and standards, and it's important you understand this. The performance test, the lending test, every experienced CRA officer will recognize on this slide. The assessment area ratio, etc., the LMI track penetration rate, the borrower characteristics, etc. While the performance tests are essentially the same for almost all banks, the standards are what are really different, are unique for each bank. Except for the assessment area ratio, performance standards are driven and based on performance context. The facts and the circumstances that are how a bank uniquely defines its market. It's called its assessment area. Now, Geodata Vision has developed a special pyramid to help visualize the importance of assessment area delineation. You can see it's the base of this pyramid. We call it the performance context pyramid for CRA. The assessment area delineation is the foundation upon which everything else rests. From the assessment area, as you've delineated it, performance context is determined, and performance context then drives performance standards, which in turn are applied to performance tests, which result in performance ratings. Now, how are the critical CRA tests affected by performance context? Well, here's two of them: lending in the LMI tracks and borrower characteristics. Simply speaking, the examiners take what other banks are doing in your assessment area, lending in the LMI tracks, and they'll compute that ratio. And then they'll determine how you compare to that ratio. Or they'll take how the assessment area LMI tracks, how much owner-occupied housing is in those LMI tracks, and they'll compute a ratio, and that'll become another standard that they compare to. It's all driven by the demographics and the lending markets in your community. So whenever you change the market, whenever you expand or contract it, you are affecting these performance context factors, which in turn drive your performance standards and expectations. Now, what I'm going to do is share with you a specially developed, very powerful mapping tool that Geodata Vision has developed for the very purpose of helping banks determine what the ideal assessment area will be for them. And it allows them to play different what-if scenarios to see how different assessment area configurations affect your performance standards and your performance results. Now, the specially dynamic map that GeoData has developed for banks to help them out with their ideal assessment area configuration has several components to it. This is a real assessment area for a real bank. All the data in it, though, is public data, so there's nothing confidential here. The assessment area, as it's currently delineated, is identified by the blue line that circumscribes the assessment area. Moreover, the hatch marks identify the tracts that reside in the assessment area. The census tracts themselves are color-coded to represent the income classification of the tracts. You can see in the legend on the right, the low and moderate income tracts are the yellow and mauve-colored areas. Moreover, this map includes bar graphs, and these bar graphs are scaled to represent the market activity in the tract. In this case, the market originations of small business loans. So the bigger the bar graph, the more activity going on. Now, in addition, this map has the ability to compute the market-driven standards that we were just talking about. In this case, it's showing us that the market-driven performance standard for small business loans in LMI tracts would be 18.96%. This is based on the assessment area configuration as it now stands of 70 tracts. But now we notice that there's some low mod tracts that are contiguous with the assessment area, and the bank may want to consider potentially annexing them and they want to determine, well, how would that affect their performance expectations? So if you keep your eye on this almost 19% market-driven standard here, you can see what will happen as we annex these additional tracts to see what happens to the performance expectation. And you can see that the market activity in these tracts is driving that performance expectation upward to the point now where it's over 23%, from 18.96% to 23.07%. So it's a very substantial increase in the market-driven performance standard for this bank. And we also, by the way, can look and see how the bank compares. So as it currently stands, or in terms of the potential assessment area configuration, the bank would have a result of, I will tell you in a second, 22.62%. And what was it beforehand? Let's take a look. If we go back to the original configuration, it ends up being 22.16%. So this map makes it very evident that the increase of census tracts, 5 census tracts, results in a very big change in the market expectations or the market-driven expectations for this bank's performance. Under the current configuration, the bank exceeds the market, 22.16%, versus 18.96%. But if the bank were to annex the additional 5 low mod tracts, it would increase to 22.62%, but the market would go to 23.07%, a 4% plus change. And the bank would go from a favorable comparison of 3.2% to an unfavorable comparison of negative 0.45%. So this is just a small demonstration of the big difference a small change in your assessment area can make. And this is why it's so important for you to be aware of how your assessment area delineation can have a dramatic impact on CRA performance requirements. Too many banks unnecessarily inflate their performance expectations because they're not aware of this impact. So what I suggest and encourage you to do is to contact GeoData Vision to find out more about how these dynamic market maps can be used to help you delineate the ideal assessment area for your bank and minimize your performance expectations. Contact Bob Suzio, bobs@geodatavision.com, or call Bob at 203-245-2750 to learn more about how this powerful tool can be used to help you compose the ideal assessment area for your bank and thereby reduce the performance pressures on your bank.